This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for September 17th, 2019, and I am your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Cristina is going to explore whether swearing makes us stronger.
Damn right.
And then Adam will look into how skin color has evolved.
That's right.
But first, I want to talk to you about scientific citetions and science reporting. I recently read an article I wanted to talk to you about, but I also want to share how I applied critical thinking throughout my reading of the article. Like a lesson learned.
Cool.
Okay. I came across the following headline. Clubby and disturbing citation behavior by researchers in Italy has surged.
Okay.
Now, disturbing was in quotes in the headline. This is by Clubby, yes, by Giorgia Guglielmi in September 11th, 2019. Here's the main idea, quoting the first paragraph. The rate at which scientists in Italy cite themselves and their compatriots is rising faster than in 10 other developed countries, according to a new study. The surge in Italy's clubby citation behavior is likely the result of a 2010 law requiring productivity standards for academic recruitment or promotion, the study authors say. These findings are a cautionary tale for research administrators who rely too much on citation metrics in allocating resources and making decisions on career development, says study author Giuseppe Di Nicalo, an engineer at the University of Pavia in Italy. Linking professional advancement to citation indicators can prod scientists into unintended behaviors and make the metrics unreliable, he says. All right. So in 2010, there's a law which changed the incentives, and then citation counts are used to get jobs. So people hack the system of citation counts. And that's the theory. That's the idea. That's the problem. This means that people are citing themselves too much and possibly peers in their own country too much. So
they kind of have agreements with their peers. I'll cite you, you cite me.
Something like that. Exactly.
Okay.
Now, around this point when you're reading the article, there's a little line graph with the title, Citations Turn Inwards. Always great to describe graphs in audio. Compared with other countries, Italy saw a faster rise in inwardness, that's in quotes, which is the percentage of citations to a country's scientific articles that came from authors in the same country. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It shows a graph from 2008 to 2016. It's comparing, at least in the graph, Japan, United Kingdom, Italy, and France on inwardness. All right. It goes from about 22% to 31% for Italy. So Italy is having a rise, okay?
Yeah.
It's certainly more than the others.
Sure.
It is a sharper line going up, right?
Yeah.
And it then cites, where the graph is from. But this graph actually starts at 20 on the y-axis and goes to 32.
I hate when they do that.
So for those people who are less familiar with science, if there's an x-axis, which usually shows you certain variables along the horizontal line, and here you have 2008, 2010 years every other year, and then the y-axis is the amount of inwardness, it's usually poor form to not have the y-axis start at 0 and be appropriately sized when you go to your first variable. Yeah. If you are going to do that, usually you put a little disjunction line, which shows that it doesn't start at 0, but even then it's a bit sketchy. Yeah. So right away I'm like, wait a minute. Italy's goes from 22 to 31. The graph goes from 20 to 32.
It'd be easily to start at 0. Sometimes you can't, just because of the numbers and
Correct.
The range.
Sometimes you can't.
But you could so easily.
Right. So that one just goes up, right? And it only has 4 countries. Now, at the opening, I did say 10 other countries. That means there's 11 in total. Where are the other ones?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a problem. Now I go back to look up at the source, which, you should always do. Science Mag. Sounds mostly legit, right?
Yeah.
This was in Science Magazine, which I could see was published by the American Advancement for the Association of Science, which I started to wonder if they had a pro-American bias.
Sure.
But I didn't immediately realize it was Science. Like the Science Journal, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, and this is the magazine of science, because I don't read Science Mag that much. That's where it comes from.
Sure.
That said, this article was not a scientific publication, but one of their pieces getting shorter coverage. So, decent source, though, as far as sources go regarding scientific literature and information. So now I skim the rest of the article, looking for a link to the original material to see what's going on. Because as soon as I saw that graph, I'm like, I need to see what the graph looks like, right? I don't trust this at all.
Yep.
There's a link. That's good. Not obvious, but clear.
Yeah.
I click on it. It's broken. Right.
Oh, it's so frustrating. And it's not old. This is September 11th, 2019.
Correct.
I expect that when I find an article from 1986.
Correct.
You know?
Now, I'm not sure who's an article online from 1986.
Sometimes it's republished.
I know.
It's a bad
I'm just asking you. When I go back in time. So, I'm not sure whose fault that is. Being charitable, perhaps Science Mag had the correct link, and then PLOS One, where it was linking to, somehow changed something. Okay?
Yeah, that's plausible.
Yeah, but even if you're changing your link, you should always have the old link still.
Agreed. So now I have to go to PLOS One, which is where this information came from, a large public access journal, and put in the author's name as a search.
Yeah, that's good.
Under the graph, it was listed as Bassin et al. I'm like, so, okay, that's easy. That's where they said they got the data from. I'll try that. Nothing relevant. All right. Okay. Wow. Of course, also Google's like, do you mean vaccine? I'm like, no, I don't.
Put in those little quotes, Google.
Yeah, exactly. Go back and see that in the rest of the piece, the written text, it is Bassini. So there's an error in their own article about the author's name. Yes. So I type that, and then I find, here's the title, Citation Gaming Induced by Bibliometric Evaluation, a country-level comparative analysis. We have a winner. Great. I'll be honest, I didn't even read the abstract, and I would just look for that figure. I was like, where is the first figure? And hopefully it's free so I can figure out what it is. Clicked on the first one, and I actually laughed out loud a little. Yes, the Italian line does trend up more than others. And this graph, this one, at least starts at 5 and goes all the way up to 50. Okay. So we're still not getting out of 100%, whatever that might mean. Mm-hmm. Why 5? Yeah. Who knows? You're that close to 0. Just start at 0, okay? Why go up to 50? Well, the U.S. starts at 44 in the year 2000 and goes up to 47 on the inwardness measure.
Oh, wow. So they didn't rise. They were just already doing it a lot.
Right. So to remind you, the big deal here is the Italian one rose from about 22 to 31. Oh my God. The States is at around 44 and then went up to 47.
You can argue size of country, number of institutions, a lot of things.
Well, yes, we'll get to that in a moment. This makes me suspicious of all of it.
Sure.
And as Adam just said, to be fair, I skimmed the paper to see what they might have said about the U.S. And in the results section, quote, all countries share a rather similar profile with apparent differences in absolute value. Yeah. The ranking is partially explained by the size of the scientific production of the countries. Countries with a large scientific output, such as the United States, naturally attract more citations from their own production, simply because they have more citing and citable articles than smaller countries such as Belgium. Okay, but that's about it. It wasn't enough to convince me that the United States being a staggeringly clear outlier, like above all the other ones, is something that couldn't have been mentioned in the original scientific piece, if only to explain it. Oh, there were 10 countries. Italy's rising faster. By the way, the States has always been really high because it right?
Well, I might also mention that the United States primarily speaks English, as do a lot of other countries.
Yes.
So they should be citing more other countries than perhaps Italy if people are publishing papers in Italian.
Well, so, yeah, on first blush, that might be true, or it could be the exact opposite.
Sure.
Because they speak English and they produce their own science so much, they'll just cite themselves because other countries speak English less than the United States.
Whereas European people may be more likely to speak other languages.
Well, yes, I thought that too. There's a huge language thing here, right?
Yeah.
So going back to the Science Mag article, quote, all the nations showed modest rises in inwardness over time, which can be explained, paradoxically, by a growth in international collaborators. These expand the number of papers from participating countries that could be cited. Take, for example, a paper co-authored by research collaborators in Italy and France. Any citation to this paper from an Italian or French authored publication will count as an intra-citation for both Italy and France, meaning it'll go towards the inwardness. So if you're doing international work and you happen to cite it, and it happens to have your country on the list, even though there's other countries there, it'll count it towards your inwardness.
Sounds like a good problem to have, in a way.
Is this measuring what we want it to measure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? There is another graph in the actual scientific publication, not covered in this coverage of that paper, which then shows you that, well, Italy's problem is worse than that. Like they balance it out by international collaboration, so it's not like it's dismissing all the results.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to summarize what we have here. We know people respond to incentives, and that scientists are people. Spoiler. Yeah. So there are ways in which scientists will adapt to job requirements by changing how they cite their own research and that of others. This may be especially problematic in Italy, which is possibly a canary in the coal mine, warning other countries of adopting similar hiring practices, as the proxy they choose for quality may cause a change in behavior that decreases the validity of that proxy. So one would hope you could just use scientific citations, But people like, well, I'm going to cite my own work and those of my compatriots. Now, also from quick first pass, your own research. People often build on their own research, having a certain domain, and then you would know your collaborators best. So it would logically follow you should cite your own work to a certain extent. But I think what was useful about this data, assuming it's legitimate, is that there was a sudden spike. It did seem to go up, and it did seem then to coincide with the introduction of this law, which really changed how citations were used. Going to a larger issue, how complicated the world is, if you're trying to hire the right people, apparently you can't use certain means of citation indices because within years, very quickly, people will adapt, and they'll start citing things in a certain way because scientists are people. How to hire good people is not the current segment I'm doing, but it does highlight how difficult it is for people who have to do such things. And there's even a point in one of the articles saying that, well, you can have citations as only part of the overall package, but people have trouble not deferring to it because they think it's robust and somewhat objective and legitimate.
I think the flip side to that is they're trying to use objective metrics. And when you don't use objective metrics and use subjective metrics, like you end up hiring people or you end up with potentially sexism, racism, whatever in your hiring practices. So you try to get away with that. You introduce other problems. Yep. Well, what's the best way? We can still think about that. Yeah,
it's a difficulty in whack-a-mole in some ways. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, the paper itself seemed pretty good. The coverage could have been better. And why have a terrible graph? And then why not even mention US in the coverage? I just found that very frustrating. It made me doubt everything else. Yep. More analysis of just how this was scaled will be useful. And because maybe that's an issue, as Adam mentioned, language could be a factor as well.
So I think the $1 million question then, Darren, is what would work better?
That's a great question, Pat. I'm not the HR expert, so I'm not sure. Sort of off the top of my head, maybe you could keep the citation indice as a part of the overall package and you forcibly weight it so people can't weight it more than, say, 30 or 40%. It's like almost an algorithm they have to follow, which spits out a number, which then add up. And the other parts would be, references, grant acquisition, the person's application, their interview process, that sort of thing. God damn it, Cristina. Does swearing make me stronger?
Full disclosure, I have a bit of a potty mouth.
Yeah, a bit of a potty mouth.
Yeah.
For those of you not familiar with the term, it's a popular euphemism that describes one who regularly uses vulgar language, especially strong profanity. I'm pretty good at it, and I can do it in 3 languages.
Nice.
I also enjoy strength training, and when a rep gets particularly tough, I do find myself swearing under my breath, and it kind of helps. So when I came across headlines a while back citing a study purporting that swearing out loud could actually boost strength and physical performance during exercise, I was all ears. A fun little side note, I learned from author Melissa Moore and her book, Holy Shit, A Brief History of Swearing, some of the most popular swear words we use today can be traced back to over 1,000 years. Now, Romans used swear words associated with sexual acts, and the word shit can be found in Old English literature.
As a swear in Old English literature?
Yes, but from what I read, it wasn't as bad of a word back then when it was used.
Sure. Okay.
I mean, you're talking Anglo-Saxon text. That was a long time ago. Before digging into the latest MoFo study by lead author Dr. Richard Stevens, I promise I'll stop, a little background on his previous research around swearing and pain endurance to set the stage. Now, Stevens, a psychologist at Keele University in England, became interested in the topic during the mid-2000s when his wife was in labor for more than 20 hours.
Wow.
In a New Yorker article from 2018, Stevens mentions that his wife swore profusely during labor, and she felt embarrassed enough that she actually apologized to the hospital staff after.
I'm sure they hear it all the time.
Exactly. The medical staff really just shrugged it off, and they assured her that swearing was a completely normal part of giving birth and something they heard all the time. So, light bulb, right, in Stevens' head? Now, according to a 2018 article in Wired called The Science of Why Swearing Reduces Pain, many psychologists traditionally believe that swearing may pain feel worse. And the reason was because of a cognitive distortion called catastrophizing. So this just basically refers to irrational thoughts we may have when we think something is way worse than it is. Like we just make it worse in our brains than it actually is. And swearing was lumped in as something that reinforced that type of catastrophic thinking. But after his wife's labor, Stevens realized that swearing is an instinctive, common pain response, and he set out to find out whether swearing makes pain feel worse or actually better. Now, do you guys recall if you swear when you stub your toe or otherwise hurt yourself?
No, for sure.
Do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And my 2.5-year-old who likes to repeat things has definitely confirmed that for me.
I also do, although when I was younger, I don't believe I did.
Right. In 2009, Stevens asked a group of 67 volunteer undergrad students to plunge one hand into a bucket of ice-cold water. The volunteers had to keep their hand in the bucket as long as they could stand it, while Stevens instructed them to repeat a neutral word like brown or wooden. Now, other times he asked them to repeat expletives that one might, quote, use if they banged their head or hit their thumb with a hammer. During the experiment, he quantified the degree of each volunteer's arousal using their heart rate and galvanic skin response. What they found with few exceptions was that the research subjects who swore could keep their hands submerged in water nearly 50% longer, or around 40 seconds longer on average. That's a long time to have your hand in ice cold water. And this was compared to when using neutral expressions. Now, at first, Stevens thought swearing might work for those who already did it a lot, but it didn't seem to matter if people were used to swearing or not. Their conclusion, swearing may be a form of pain management. As he said to Wired, pain used to be thought of as a purely biological phenomenon, but actually pain is very much psychological. The same level of injury will hurt more or less in different circumstances. We know, for example, that this fascinated me. We know, for example, that if male volunteers are asked to rate how painful a stimulus is, most of them will say it hurts less if the person collecting the data is a woman.
Well, does that mean it hurts less, or it means they're just saying
in comparison to a man or a woman collecting the same data?
Right, but Adam's point stands. Does it hurt less, or are they saying it hurts less?
The third variable is it may be a bit of both.
Right.
It may
Sure.
actually hurt less because you're trying to make a good impression, which then changes the nature of your experience.
Right.
He goes on to say, pain isn't a simple relationship between the intensity of a stimulus and the severity of your response. Circumstances, your personality, your mood, even the experience of previous pain all affect the way we experience a physical hurt. Okay, so fast forward to 2017, when Stevens, along with two Brooklyn-based researchers at Long Island University named David Spear and Emmanuel Caddis, set out to see if swearing has an effect on strength and power performance. I guess you can call working out a different type of pain, right?
Sure. Pain and gain.
I actually laughed out loud when reading Rita Giordano's 2018 Philadelphia Inquirer article covering the research. She wrote, the trials were carried out in two bastions of colorful language, Brooklyn and England. Now, according to the results of the small-scale studies outlined in Keele University's press release, Dr. Stevens and his team conducted two experiments. In the first, 29 participants completed a test of anaerobic power, short, intense period on an exercise bike, after both swearing and not swearing. In the second, 52 participants completed an isometric hand grip test, again after both swearing and not swearing. The results showed a 4.6% increase in power during the bike test, known as the Wingate test, and an 8.2% power spike in a separate test of hand grip strength. So these were the three main highlights from the study's abstract. Swearing can increase performance of a task of physical power. Swearing can increase performance of a task of physical strength. And researchers did not find any evidence that autonomic arousal may underlie these effects, simply meaning, our autonomic nervous system acts largely unconsciously, right? It regulates bodily functions like heart rate, digestion, etc. Mm-hmm. So they did not find any evidence that that might underlie the effects. So quoted in the PR, Stevens says, we know from our earlier research that swearing makes people more able to tolerate pain. A possible reason for this is that it stimulates the body's sympathetic nervous system. That's the system that makes your heart pound when you're in danger. If that is the reason, we would expect swearing to make people stronger too. And that is what we found in these experiments. So these findings were published in the journal Psychology of Sports and Exercise last year, and also presented at the British Psychological Society's annual conference. Now, interestingly, when the researchers measured heart rate and other things they would expect to be affected if the sympathetic nervous system was responsible for an increase in strength, they didn't find significant changes. So the big question remains, why the F is this happening? Says Stevens, quote, quite why it is that swearing has these effects on strength and pain tolerance remains to be discovered. We have yet to understand the power of swearing fully. Now, they do have some theories about the relationship between our brains and profanity. As Stevens' co-author Spear told the New Yorker, quote, the take-home message of this study is that when you swear, you become distracted. In science, we call it disinhibited. Basically, you don't pay attention to what you're doing or how difficult the activity, and therefore you are able to put more force or more effort into the activity.
That makes sense.
Now, he also adds that swearing appears to happen in a region of the brain not typically associated with language processing, but a part of the brain responsible for emotion. So he references research that finds some patients with diminished verbal ability due to brain-damaged areas that are associated with routine speech can still retain their ability to swear, which bolsters this idea. So Stevens has already kicked off a more comprehensive study, and he hopes to use functional MRIs to hone in on which parts of the brain are activated when swearing. And since this research is so expensive, they actually started a crowdfunding site. I went on it. It's pretty fun. They're selling t-shirts and baseball caps. So if you're interested, check out swearingmakesyouStronger.com.
What do the shirts and baseball caps say?
They say swearing makes you stronger.
Oh.
Thanks, Cristina. And now we turn to Adam. How did skin color evolve?
It's a great question, Darren. So I recently stumbled upon an article which discussed the evolutionary cause of various skin pigments in different human populations. Now, I realized I hadn't given much serious thought to how that had happened, and the guesses I might have made seemed to be wrong, so I figured it would be worth covering on the show. One of the things which led me to the article was a skin color map, which showed the skin color of native populations in areas across the globe. Now, as you might expect, it had darker skin tones around the equator and lighter skin tones as you went further away, but there were really a lot of gradients, and it really matched with that a lot more than I might have expected. Now, the obvious conclusion here is that sunlight exposure relates to skin color. Sun causes tanning, and people in sunny places are more tanned, so people might ask if that's related. Well, that isn't really how evolution works. So the Lamarckian model, where traits accrued over a person's life are passed on to their children, is just not how inheritance works. So the giraffe did not stretch its neck to reach leaves during its life and then give birth to longer-necked offspring. The giraffes with longer necks were more likely to get the leaves at the top of the trees, be more well-fed, be healthier, and then have higher chances of having healthy offspring who themselves had longer necks. That's kind of more how evolution by natural selection works. So whatever's going on, the evolution of darker skin must be an adaptation to the sun, exposure to sunlight. Now, I like to think about all aspects of human anatomy and behavior through the lens of evolution, but this usually pertains to general traits which are shared by all people on the earth. Now, my first thought on why different skin pigmentation would occur might be something like skin cancer. So if darker skin protects against skin cancer, then it would be selected for in a sunnier place, but less so where there is less sun and more need to cover one's skin to protect from the cold. But this doesn't really explain why people wouldn't just all have dark skin, because this would not necessarily seem to have a downside. Well, it turns out skin cancer isn't really part of it at all.
Wow. So that would have been my guess too, and I'm surprised to hear that it wasn't.
Darren's giving me a skeptical eye, so he thinks it might be, and we can discuss this.
Darren's wondering if you should get the book off a shelf in a different room and start flipping through it while you...
Feel free to. Now, skin tone has little to do with sunburn or skin cancer, but rather the interplay of the competing needs for two essential vitamins, that being folate and vitamin D. Exposure to the sun, more specifically UV light, triggers the production of vitamin D, which is why people living further up north may benefit from a vitamin D supplement, especially during the winter months, or further down south if you're in the southern hemisphere, of course. Now, the flip side to this is that UV rays destroy folate. So there's your sort of too much of a good thing kind of deal. So if you let too much in, you lack folate. You let too little in, you lack vitamin D. So depending on how important each of these are, skin tone would be optimized through evolution by natural selection to optimize those two vitamins and optimize the level of skin pigment to adjust.
It will adapt itself to an environment, not necessarily optimize, unless that's what you mean by optimize. Just thought I would clarify.
Sure. It'll adapt, yeah. So what do these two vitamins do? Folate plays a role in DNA activities. It is most important in women who are pregnant as it can impact fetal development. So this is why pregnant women or women who are expecting to get pregnant are often told to take a folate supplement. Some people say it's a good idea that anyone who's sort of at an age to get pregnant to take one just in case. Now, if pregnant women don't have enough folate, the fetus can develop a neural tube disorder. That can be very bad. Now, vitamin D helps absorb calcium, which strengthens bones. So lacking vitamin D can cause rickets, a disease where bone tissue isn't properly mineralized. But there are other less common health risks which can occur from a lack of vitamin D, such as a risk of cardiovascular disease, cognitive impairments, asthma, and cancer. So if you shave a chimp, its skin is generally very light. This indicates that as early hominins shed their fur due to the hot African climate, they likely revealed light skin underneath. This was about 1 or 2 million years ago. Now, the first effect that would likely have taken place would have been folate deficiencies leading to miscarriages in certain people, or an increase in folate deficiencies. Those who had genes for more melanin or acquired a mutation which caused more melanin in the skin would have darker skin and would therefore protect their folate and have advantages by having less miscarriages. Their children, more likely to be born alive, would be more likely to pass on those genes, so you can see how that could easily lead to darker skin. So then later, as humans spread out across the globe, vitamin D deficiencies would be a greater problem than folate deficiencies in certain areas as the sun destroys less folate. And so inversely, genes or mutations for lighter skin would result. So we find in human populations mutations for dark skin and mutations for light skin, usually an interplay of those that change as populations move around. Now, the happy medium is the ideal skin pigment where you live, and this would result in dark-skinned people near the equator and light-skinned people near the poles. Generally, this means more up north, as most of the land mass further from the equators is in the north, but we do see lighter skin tones for native people as we go further south in South America, Africa, and Australia. A small complication in this, which actually does fit quite well with the model, is that native people in the northern US and Canada, so Alaska, Nunavut, places like that, have diets rich in seafood, which contains a lot of vitamin D. So this means that they're able to get that vitamin D without having as much sun. So slightly darker skin protects the folate while not having the trade-off of low vitamin D, which they're getting anyway. So we see that these native groups have slightly darker skin than we would otherwise expect. So as for skin cancer, one reason for which it's not likely as big a contributor to darkening skin is because it's more likely to occur later in life after people have children and are therefore more or less discardable with little impact to their reproductive success. This is kind of why people die when they're old, because they've already had their children. So then humans use these skin colors as reasons to hate and kill each other, even though it really is just skin deep. So we started out with fur, and then we were all white or pretty pale. Then we were all black, and then, skin color changed over a relatively short period of time, sort of after the out of Africa, when humans started to spread around the globe. Human skin tone throughout the surface of the Earth seems to vary depending on sun exposure, and this is likely due to evolution by natural selection, balancing the levels of folate and vitamin D in our bodies. This is something you should keep in mind depending on your skin tone and where you live. If you're a woman looking to get pregnant, especially if you are lighter skinned and living in a sunny place, you could benefit from a folic acid supplement. If you live somewhere with long winters, which include short days with little sunlight, and you like to cover yourself up to protect from the cold, especially if your skin is darker, then you could benefit from vitamin D supplements during those months. With exceptions for people that have certain medical conditions, most of the rest of the vitamins that people take won't really do that much. And just don't be racist. It's unscientific. Just cut it out. And it might get you fired from SNL if you aren't careful.
Thanks, Adam. And thanks for joining us once again, listeners. I talked to you about how people in Italy, and probably everywhere, are gaming the citation world of their scientific publications and whether that may be a problem. And try to have good graphs, regardless of what kind of reporting you do.
Don't truncate the y-axis unless you have to.
Cristina told us that swearing does seem to make you stronger in certain physical tasks, but we're not entirely sure why at this moment. And Adam explored how skin color evolved, and it mainly seems to be about folate and vitamin D. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Well, checkers, if you have an opinion on this, I'd love to hear about it. Do you think that profanities traditionally considered vulgar will lose their power to shock? And
Yeah, so write in, you fucking